I am fortunate to be joined by Mr. Victor Hart. Mr. Hart is chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, TTEITI. He also sits in a position for many years where he has given to this country and worked in many different areas. It is in those areas and that brought him to lead this industry. Extractive Industry Transparency Institute, a global standard, is what they have of promoting open accountability and management of oil, gas, and mineral resources. Mr. Hart, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is good to see you, as always, as I saw you before. Again, having this wonderful look here this morning. There are some things here that folks need to understand that we are going to try to knock out in the 26 minutes we have. That is what the Extractive Industries Institute is set up for. I want you to start to lay out, however, there is a test by which you measure countries' compliance. And to explain to our listeners, one, what is the industry about briefly, and the test that is used to measure government's performance and countries' performance.
Yeah, well, the extractive industries term is used to cover industries engaged in the extraction of natural resources in a country. Mm-hmm. And the sectors in the extractive sectors are oil, gas, and mining. So that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, our emphasis has primarily been to date oil and gas exploration, monetizing, revenue generation, and so on. Mm-hmm. We are now expanding our net to include the mining sector meaning quarries and asphalt mining. Mm-hmm. In other countries that are not as fortunate as we are to have oil and gas, you find that the extractive sectors might be fishing, or it might be bauxite, or gold, or diamond, mm-hmm. or coal. So that natural resources that are extracted from the earth, forestry, for instance, is an extractive industry, all come under the umbrella of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which mm-hmm. is a worldwide initiative with headquarters in Oslo, Norway, comprised of 52 countries that are rich in natural resources. And Trinidad and Tobago is one. And in terms of measuring the quality of our work, when one joins the EITI, one joins as a candidate country, and after satisfying all the checks and balances required to improve the reporting and accuracy of the revenues generated and so on from this sector, one is promoted to compliant country status. And Trinidad and Tobago became a compliant country status in January of 2015. So we now are at the highest rank of membership of the EITI, having started at the bottom of the ladder as a candidate country.
Now, just to be clear, a country desirous of becoming a member is solicited, or they approach your organization and seek membership?
Well, the initiative is a worldwide initiative recognized as the gold standard for the management of the extraction of natural resources. Mm-hmm. And some countries in the early stages were actually approached to join this organization. But today, because it's such a renowned gold standard, you find that countries are reaching out to join the club. So, for instance, in May of this year, Suriname, with the help of Trinidad and Tobago, applied for and gained membership of the EITI. And last month, Guyana applied for membership and is expected to become a member later this month, again with the help of Trinidad and Tobago as the CARICOM, the leading CARICOM EITI member.
EITI, just as our listeners are very clear, is an organization that is there, not-for-profit.
That's right.
A not-for-profit organization that is there. The purpose is to check the resources of a country, the way contracts are issued, the way revenue is collected, the way expenditure is done, and report that back to the citizenry.
Yes.
I collect all that.
Yes. In summary, what we are trying to do through the EITI mechanism is to protect the people's patrimony.
Beautiful.
Because if you take Trinidad and Tobago as an example, the people of Trinidad and Tobago own these natural resources of oil and gas, and our children's inheritance is based on ongoing full, participation in the revenues generated. So the ITI is an important governance initiative that protects the people's patrimony and our children's inheritance.
Victor Hart, chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago EITI, is my guest here. After laying that out, and that is the reason I started up that avenue, is the standard of collection, measurement, delivery, and data collection comparable to other oil producers in the world? That is the standards here in Trinidad and Tobago.
I would say yes. We have produced a report, an annual report, since we became a member of the EITI. And to date, we have produced 4 reports, starting with fiscal year 2011 up to fiscal year 2015. And we are currently working on a report that will be out by the end of the year for fiscal year 2016. And so far, our findings have been that the monies declared by the companies to have been paid to government have in fact coincided with the independent declaration by government of monies received from the companies. So the idea is that we are really checking to make sure that payments due are made, and having made the payments, that the government books show receipt of the payments through the Board of Inland Revenue, through the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. And so far, we are happy to say that we have found no major discrepancy at all between payments declared to have been made and payments that have been declared to have been received and independently audited by the EITI auditor.
Let me ask you this question, if this is under your purview, because the recent situation we have in Trinidad and Tobago of A&V oil and gas, the whole question of so-called ghost oil, is that something that draws the attention of your monitoring side of your organization, of the monitoring side of your organization?
Absolutely. And in fact, A&V Oil and Gas is not one of the companies that's participating in what is a voluntary initiative. Our organization met during the course of this year twice with several small operators like A&V and invited them to participate. We explained to them the mechanism, the benefits to be derived, and many of the small companies declined to participate for whatever reason, and that was their right, because it is a voluntary initiative. Now, had A&V decided to participate in the EITI, their production levels would have been reflected in our EITI report and the revenues that they have paid to government. But A&V is almost a subcontractor to Petrotrin. They do not operate independently. Petrotrin has a number of small operators, independent operators, to whom Petrotrin leases small acreages that may be too small for Petrotrin's large organization to exploit.
Yes, sir, but they sell to Petrotrin. So if Petrotrin is a member of your group, then I ask of you, would the error, the so-called ghost oil, be something that would have been noticed by your organization through the receipt of oil and the payment?
No. It would not have come to light. But what we are suggesting as a way forward from this fake oil scandal is to learn from the experience, and we are telling Petrotrin, which incidentally Petrotrin is a member of our oversight steering committee that monitors the implementation of the EITI in Trinidad and Tobago. We are saying that Petrotrin, as a member and a participating company in the EITI, if it's subletting acreages to smaller companies, a condition of the sublet, a condition of the contract should be that you have to participate, as we do the principal company.
That's right.
And we are hoping that in the not too distant future, that recommendation would be accepted by Petrotrin, would be accepted by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, to whom we have written making that recommendation. So a situation like this would not recur.
The chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, we simply call it EITI this morning, is here with me. He is Victor Hart, a very important organization because there is a lot to be gleaned from the reporting, the accounting, and the data collection that you have. And which leads me to this question. Because you have so many oil-producing countries who are members of this voluntary initiative, you must see what is the size of labor force they have, how much they're paying out, etc., to get the results they're getting of scale compared to Trinidad and Tobago. How well do we compare with the amount of people who work in the industry here? That's producing X amount of barrels per day. Are we too worker heavy? Is my question, or is this comparable with other countries of scale? As I said,
yeah. One of the advantages of Trinidad and Tobago's membership of this worldwide initiative, the EITI, is that we are able to compare even revenues generated, compare best practice of other countries, and adopt what might best suit Trinidad and Tobago to improve our operations. And yes, we compare the labor force in other countries with Trinidad and Tobago, and we note that Trinidad and Tobago extractive sectors, the oil and gas industries in particular, that generate so much expenditure and income, employs only 3% of the nation's labor force. And that is really very, very low. It's not surprising because it is a capital-intensive industry where you're operating through plants, technology, heavy equipment. But still, it is a small percentage of the country's labor force, given the situation when one looks at it across the world. Now, that is not to say that within the industry, one might not see there's maybe an oversupply of labor in a particular company. So, for instance, we hear all the time that Petrotrin, with an employment of 5,000 staff, is overstaffed as compared to comparable companies elsewhere. Our Texaco's refinery, for instance, is another case, specific section of the Texaco operation which appears to be overstaffed. And we hear this, with other industries as well, not just the oil and gas. We hear it with TSTT, we hear it with Caribbean Airlines, and so on. It seems to be a problem that we have inherited in Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, we would like to see better analyses done so that the industry could help itself. But it's not really part of our remit other than to observe and comment.
And I only ask you the comparison. Yes, I'm not directly trying to say whether, in fact, this is what they should do or should not do. I'm just looking for other countries producing the same amount of output, a comparable output, and whether, in fact, the question of a workforce that is too large, which has been proffered many times, is a valid one or not. The same argument could be made of is Petrotrin, because many times we hear that they are unable to attract the best brains to be in management because the payments made to these people, the remuneration, which is their salary, is not comparable in the rest of the world. That leads me to ask of you that question. What is being paid to the management of Petrotrin, for instance? Are those wages comparable with other countries around the world of scale? And I keep saying of scale because I want to keep them, that they're producing close to what we're doing, or after you do your numbers, to see if, in fact, we are competitive with what we are paying board members here to get the best and brightest to do the business.
Yes. I have no means of giving you a definitive answer to that question, but one gathers that because the oil and gas business is a worldwide industry, and technical people, the best people, are very mobile. And for instance, Trinidad and Tobago has experts operating in all over the world in the oil and gas industry. My feeling is that for Trinidad and Tobago to retain its best talent, it has to be competitive in terms of salaries and remuneration to its top people.
So, to the best of your knowledge, that argument that folks are making, that there are many people not being attracted, the best and brightest is not being attracted to the board management of Petrotrin, for instance, is because they can make more money elsewhere. That is not necessarily so.
I'm not at board level because the board appointment is a political decision. The question of remuneration does not arise, but at management level
is what
I would
said,
think
yes.
that they are earning comparable salaries. Otherwise, they may very well have migrated elsewhere. But where there is a problem is that within, say, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, where we have talented people overseeing the energy sector, their salaries are way below what their opposite numbers are being paid in industry. So that we do see over the years that the best people in the public service are often attracted away from public duties, and they take up duties in private companies. And that is something that worries me, because it does mean that the people who are best suited to protect the country's interests within ministries are sometimes attracted away from public service into private service.
UK trained chartered quantity surveyor and project manager is my guest. He is the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. He is Mr. Victor Hart. In the concluding moments we have here, I had with me Mr. Abdullah. I have had before Mr. Roger of the OWTU. And the question is always raised of the best practice in our oil sector, specifically in Petrotrin as it relates to having the right measurements. There's something that's happening, and I'm asking you to make the comparison here, which is called a trust system of verifying what is given by given to Petrotrin. Do we have the best standards set up right now, or the best, or at least comparable good practice or best practice standards set up for Petrotrin right now?
Absolutely not. And it applies not just to Petrotrin. It applies perhaps even more so in the quarry sector, where the trust system is in place. And it means, therefore, that government's revenues are based on production levels reported by the company doing the production without independent checks by, say, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Not meaning to be disparaging, you mean the fox is guarding the fox?
Yes. And also it sometimes means that there is lack of technical expertise in how the measurements are done. And we in our EITI reports have been saying over the recent years, and so too has the Auditor General in his annual reports to Parliament, that the system of checks and balances seem not to be operating sufficiently. The Auditor General said in his last report that for the last 3 years he has not been able to get verification from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries that they have been able to verify the production levels on which the government has received tax payments. So there is really a fundamental problem in terms of the verification of production and the resulting tax liability to government. We monitor what is due to have been paid and what has been paid. But if in fact the production level is incorrect, and the correct amount is paid on that reduced production level, we would say yes, the figures balance. But what is important is to ensure that the production levels reported are accurate, so that the government and the country benefits to the full extent of the tax revenues paid.
Yes, this is very clear. What we sought to do and still continuing to do this morning is to look at not just the budget as just numbers, but look at the components that contribute towards the revenue of the country or deprive the country of revenue. And in breaking down those components, we all get a better understanding of what we're dealing with. I do want to move you into another area where your expertise and your company's expertise is needed here. Is there greater efficiency and the attendant urgency placed in the allocation of blocks for exploration? These are blocks that are given out to subcontractors to explore and get more out of the land, a greater yield. Do you think there is greater efficiency in doing that, one? And if you do, is the attendant urgency placed in the allocation of these blocks by the government?
Yeah. Well, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries has over the years developed what appears on the face of it to be a very efficient system whereby bid rounds organized and tenders or bids invited for the allocation of blocks, whether on land or offshore. And to all appearances, it seems to be working very well. One does not hear complaints that there might be favoritism. It's a very open process. And I would say that based on my observations and the feedback, I get, the system is working well, and there have been no complaints to my knowledge on it.
A lot of calls have been made for the upgrade of the infrastructure of our industry here. Is it too costly to do that? The neglect and who neglected and who did not is really irrelevant. We are where we are right now. Yes. The cost of upgrade and the state of our industry as compared to many of your other members of scale output. How are we doing?
Well, Trinidad and Tobago suffers from a culture of poor maintenance. If we look at government buildings around town, I had a foreigner from Norway, actually, who I was driving around Port of Spain a week ago. And I said, well, we are in the heart of Port of Spain. And she says, yeah, interesting, but how come the maintenance of the buildings is so poor? And this was a stranger seeing Port of Spain, for the first time. And so, too, when recently I had cause to drive through Petrotrin's refinery, I was shocked to see how dilapidated the infrastructure there looked. I worked in Petrotrin, when I was an 18-year-old young man, and I was really shocked to see how rusted and run down the refinery looks today. So it must be a concern even to Petrotrin's management today that their infrastructure needs upgrading, restoring, and oil spills avoided and so on. And I'm pretty sure it would be a hefty bill to undertake. But why is it so much now? Because it has been ignored in the past, as we've ignored our public buildings in the past and still do.
Victor Hart, I need to thank you here, but I want to ask you another question because your company do a lot of good things in the sense that you store information, and that, of course, is always having the information is what is going to guide anybody to go anywhere. I want to ask you to look at the 12.5% tax across the board levied by the Minister of Finance on stuff extracted, oil extracted in Trinidad and Tobago. Is this consistent with the industry? Is this a groundbreaking? Is this a new thing, or is this something that has been practiced or something like something else practiced elsewhere?
Well, the thing is that Trinidad and Tobago has had a royalty tax anyhow, and it varied from 10% to 15% depending upon the particular operatives. And therefore, I think what the minister is saying, he wants to now regularize it to 12.5% across the board. So in principle, I don't think there would be an objection to a regularizing of a tax measure. But the question is whether the negotiations with the companies have taken place and there is some meeting of minds, or whether in fact that could be a sticking point in the implementation of this tax revenue. But as a principle, applying a royalty tax is nothing new. and most countries do it as well.
And if it stands to reason, though I see your point, if it stands to reason that some folks will pay 2, some will pay 8, some will pay 10, some will pay 15%.
Yes.
If you've got a standardized situation of a 12.5 across the board, it's a sort of a midway ground.
And it simplifies the process.
It simplifies the process, which is always a predictable situation, is one you can plan in.
Yes.
Give our folks more information as how they can get to your website. And just before you do that, I went to your site. I looked at some of the member countries there. And one area, unless the site need to be updated, I did not get green, which signifies that the country has not been judged on the 2016 standards. Am I reading that correct, or did I misread something?
Yeah, we are currently on the Bible, the standard that applies across the board is the EITI standard 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And countries that are currently being evaluated for their recent performance have to measure up against the requirements of the 2016. When we were validated, the then standard was the EITI standard 2013. And we passed that. So that next year, we are going to be evaluated on the highest standard, which is 2016. So
I needed to get that clear, so now that I tell our listeners to go up to your site, when they see it, they understand it.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up.
So for our listeners to be clear, they want to get in touch with the Extractive Industry Institute. Tell them how they can do that.
Yes, simply Google EITI Trinidad and Tobago, and that will take you to our site, and you will get a good idea of the important work we are doing in protecting the people's patrimony and our children's inheritance by making sure that the wealth of the country's natural resources accrue to our people.
One of the earliest things I learned in life that really proved to be really true and useful, you don't have to know everything, you just have to know where to go to find it.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
going to your site provides a whole lot of information. Victor Hart, thank you so much for taking the time to come in this Sunday morning. I'm sure I'll be knocking on your door again to ask you back here as we continue understanding, because that was the purpose of this morning, listeners, understanding the components that make up this thing we heard 2 Fridays ago called a budget, and some numbers thrown at you, and you go like, well, what about this and what about that? We're going to try to just break it up as much as possible.
Right, it was my pleasure being here again.
It was mine. It was mine having you here. Thank you so much.